on the way to Shantiniketan.
If you picture Shantiniketan, it probably looks something just like this. A communal life in a rural setting amidst the tranquil landscapes of tall deciduous forests by the river systems of Kopai. And for the most part, you'd be right. A living embodiment of the great philosopher, poet and polymath Rabindranath Tagore's vision, drawing on ancient, medieval and folk traditions from across the region. Arguably, this place can be called the cultural capital of everything quintessentially Bengal. It's hard to imagine that in just about a century, this red soil of Bengal has gone from an agricultural community isolated from the rest of the world to becoming one of the biggest ecotourism destinations in India. Traveling through Shantiniketan, what you might notice at the first glance are these new projects, the luxury hotels, which draws tourists by the hordes all year long. But hidden just behind the facade of these shiny new bungalows are the remnants of these cultural capitals past. The rise of a new indigenous imperial power of the Rarh region, a dark violent period of history strikingly foreshadowed by what drew me here in the first place.
It is known as Kalikapur Rajbari, 30 kilometers away from the main city of Durgapur.
Traveling through the Rarh region, you keep encountering history, sometimes hidden deep in the jungles or right by the road in plain sight. The remnants of the Sadgop rule can still be seen and felt. The Sadgops were an offshoot of the pastoral Gopar tribes who broke away from the main tribe in the early 16th century. Their switch to agriculture was only the starting point of a rise to eminence. By means of extending their activities to trade, they established control over the land they had put under the plough. The leaders from many such isolated groups acquired political and military power at the local level by pledging their allegiance to the Nawabs of Bengal. Who were basically the independent monarchs of the Mughal dynasty. Interestingly, under the Mughal Nawabs, Bengal contributed the largest share of funds to the imperial treasury in Delhi. The native landlords established themselves as the Zamindars, kind of like the feudal lords of Europe, where they were allowed to maintain their own land and army in exchange of their loyalty to the ruling monarchy. Our story unfolds in such a medieval village called Moira, tucked away in the outer fringes of Kar jungle, right on the floodplains of Bengal. For centuries, this was a small community of farmers and herders. Since the late medieval period, Sadgops had established themselves as the dominant political power in the peripheral lateritic forest areas of the Rarh region, with their influence spreading as far as to the districts of Birbhum and Midnapur. For about 200 years, Moira was the seat of power for the Sadgops, who ruled the entire region until the late 1800s, when the Brits started taking power and land under their control. The British company eventually rivaled the authority of the Nawabs and established the colonial control over the fertile soil of Bengal.
আচ্ছা
হ্যাঁ তারপর মা আছে আমাদের ওই পাড়া মা আছে আসলে মায়ের পুজো হয় ওই ধর্মরাজের পুজো হয় মায়েরও হয় দুজনেরই হয় একসঙ্গে
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা
বৈশাখ মাসে
Visitors are very rare in this part of the world. I guess this old man spotted us since the time we entered this village.
আমার নাম পঞ্চানন বিশ্বাস দেখুন
ও বাড়ি দেখাবেন
আমার বাড়িটা দেখুন তিনটে বাড়ির মোড়
He was happy to see a relatively young bunch of people trying to explore the history of the place where he has seen it all. He invites us to his house, and surprisingly enough, we discover that we have got ourselves into 100 years of very, very intense history funneled into a very small village, which barely finds a place on the map.
না না কাপড় ছাড়তে হবে না ঠিক আছে
We get introduced to this lady who has seen history unfold for about 120 years.
নাম কি হ্যাঁ ভোলা দাসী কত বয়স আপনার
দেখো 120 হয়ে গেল 110 হয়েছে কখন
120 হয়ে গেল এখন এমনি
আর চোখে দেখি বেশি না কানে শুনি বেশি না
A little weak on her five senses, she still takes pride over the time spent here and delights in telling stories about her place. We were told about the time when River Ajay flooded these areas, for which the local Zamindar shifted his base to Kalikapur, just a few kilometers away. She set us up with everything that we needed to know and tipped us off to some abandoned ruins belonging to the bygone royalty.
ওই যে গরুগুলো দাঁড়িয়ে রয়েছে
হ্যাঁ
ওখান থেকে ওই ছবি তুললেন ওই
হ্যাঁ।
পর্যন্ত
হুম
কেউ পালকিতে চেপে বা ঘোড়ায় চেপে যেতে পারতো না ধরে মাঠ মাঠ বেদম মাঠ নামশালা কেউ গান করতে পারতো না এইখানটা পেরিয়ে যাবেই তারপরে গান করবে
আচ্ছা
এখানটা পেরিয়ে যাবেই তারপরে জুতো পায়ে দেবে এই শিব মন্দির আর এইসব
Terms like the Zamindars or the Cornwallis Code in today's context almost seems bizarre. But we encounter these words being casually thrown around when we spoke to some locals with oral history.
কার বানানো এটা
ওই জমিদারের বাড়ি
জমিদারের বাড়ি আচ্ছা
তারা এখানে থাকে না
And the lost time particularly comes back to life when you see one house which stands to testify their story.
তারা এখন কোথায় থাকে বলি জমিদার বাড়ির লোকজন তাদের আর কেউ নেই তো এরকমই হয়ে পড়ে আছে এটা এখন
Built above 400 years ago, the tale of this abandoned mansion, or whatever remains of it, begins circa 16th century with a man from the Sadgop clan, Paramananda Roy, one of the landed gentry of Bengal. And to understand his story, we need to get behind the wheel. Moira to Kalikapur, 5 miles of wintertime vistas whip past the windows, evocative for some of another time. A time after the Nawabs of Bengal. The Brits quickly realized that the agricultural potential of these lands far outweighed their initial goals of increasing tax revenue. By means of encouraging investment in land and agriculture, they created a condition for long-term economic growth for both the East India Company and the region's inhabitants. But they did not want to mess with the local administration in villages for several logistical reasons. One being that the company did not want to upset those who had traditionally enjoyed the power and prestige in rural Bengal. So they allowed these factional imperial thrones to rule nominally in exchange of a fixed tax system. Happy ending, right? Enter Lord Cornwallis with his Permanent Settlement Act of 1793. As a strategic move, the right to keep armed forces was stripped off from the Zamindars, and they just remained the tax collectors of the land. They were considerably weakened and banned from holding any court, as it was brought under the supervision of a collector appointed by the company. So technically the Brits installed an army of toothless tigers in form of the Zamindars in exchange of letting them keep their riches. Thus comes the end of an era of the feudal lords of Bengal. Some people must live in great spaces, where the sky goes on forever, where everyone must bend to the land, where to hunt, to fish, to sleep under that big sky aren't just activities, but a way of life. The legendary Zamindar of Moira, Paramananda Roy, was one of those people, and this was his home. Out of the window, the modern world seems to fade away, then disappear altogether, like the last century never happened, or even the century before that. Nestled within the surrounding jungles is the small village of Kalikapur, no different from any other village in Bengal, where farming is still the way of life. Oddly enough, strolling around in this rural setup, it is hard not to bump into random pieces of Bengal heritage that whispers those tales of its powerful past. These traditional houses were once a part of the regal lifestyle built on the forest highlands to handle the rainy weather and the flash floods. But most importantly, they featured a huge shrine of goddess Durga at the center, which follows the Eastern philosophy that all things originate from a single source and expand in all directions. Its sheen has quite since faded, yet the grandiosity of the palatial complex of 7 lavish buildings still narrates a charming history of the architectural prowess of the time, which dates back by 400 years. Built with terracotta bricks and some natural adhesive mixture, these buildings have seen centuries come and go. Interestingly, no marble was used in their construction. Instead, the dust from conch shells were used to give the walls a smooth finish. Despite the ravages of time and the devastating cyclone Aila in 2009, the main structures stand firm. To me, these grand mansions seem to defy time. You can't just help but imagine that these colonnaded balconies and the ceremonial inner courtyards, marble statues and grand arches evoke an era of slow gentility. An era of mustachioed, starched dhoti-clad zamindars and their doe-eyed brides in red and white saris and big vermilion bindis. You can almost see their red alta-patterned feet going through the stairs and the jingle of their bangles as they peep through the large windows. It was another time, one that very few still remember, the India before partition, when these rooms, this house was part of the seat of power, as they once echoed with the laughter and whispers of these royal families, yet now they stand silent and still. With Indian independence and the introduction of a democratic administration, the zamindari system was replaced by a sovereign governance, and many of these erstwhile grand families fell into strained financial circumstances. They no longer had the source of tax income required to maintain such huge mansions, and as a result, most of these grand buildings fell in decrepitude. Unable to maintain their vast residences, these magnificent buildings crumbled into decay. A poignant depiction can be seen in Satyajit Ray's film Jalshaghar, which captures this post-colonial pathos of the Zamindar's downfall. where the film's reclusive protagonist, coming from a long lineage of Zamindars, stands alone on the terrace of his crumbling mansion, rigid in his decision and refusal to accept the winds of change, even as his family legacy disintegrates around him. He sells his last heirloom to host a final soiree in his crumbling mansion. A symbol of the decline of Bengal's Zamindars. As the surrounding jungles constantly battle back to reclaim this land, a lone caretaker does very little favor to the mansion that just doesn't want to be lived on. The story of Kalikapur Rajbari, the home of the Sadgop Zamindar, is a similar tale of grandeur, tragedy and resilience. The Durga Dalan and the Nat Mandir, once the heart of the Rajbari, now lie silent. Yet they still exude an ageless grandeur during Durga Puja, when this lifeless building springs back to life with a hope. A hope that resonates through the silent corridors and empty courtyards of this once magnificent mansion. But this story does not need to end here. Actually, it shouldn't. The history of this place is still cloudy, but this village has that deep romantic allure. Not just for the rustic charm, but for its people.
আমার আমার হলো 78।
আর ওনার আমার 60
And I consider it my privilege that during the course of this day, they let us into their lives, their stories, and we developed a deep connection in such a short time.
মিষ্টি খেও।
ছাগল গরু সবই আছে তো গরু এগুলো এতগুলো সব আমার কি রান্না করছো ভাত বসিয়েছো নাকি
More than the place, it's the people which makes the place what it is today. And meeting them felt like a glimpse, a window to centuries ago. And that's what captivated us the most about this place.
ওই যে পয়সার দিলেন এটা কিসের জন্য কাউকে কোনো কিছু খাইয়ে দেবো
হ্যাঁ খাইয়ে দেবেন, হ্যাঁ সবাইকে একটু মিষ্টি খাইয়ে দেবেন।
একটা করে দেবো
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
নাকি
মিষ্টি খাইয়ে দেবেন সবাই।
আমি মিষ্টি খাইয়ে দেবো
হ্যাঁ।
আপনার নাম হবে
একদম
ওই বাবুকে দিয়ে গেছে
ঠিক আছে ঠিক আছে, হ্যাঁ 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 খুব ভালো।
আপনার নামটা কি?
আমার নাম ময়ূক। ময়ূক
ময়ূক।
ময়ূক।
আচ্ছা,
হ্যাঁ
আপনার কলম আছে?
হ্যাঁ
কলম টলম আছে?
কলম তো পকেটে নেই এখন, এই
ওখানে গাড়িতে আছে?
গাড়িতে হয়তো থাকবে। হ্যাঁ আমি লিখে দেবো, ঠিক আছে
একটু নামটা
ঠিক আছে লিখে দেবো। হুম
আমি যখনই আমার মনে পড়বে
হ্যাঁ
আমি আপনাকে কল করবো,
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
আপনার নম্বর দিয়ে যাবেন,
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
আমি আমার ঘরে ফোন আছে। আপনি যে এইখানটা দেখে গেলেন তার জন্যে আপনাদের পরিচয় দিলাম।
And it will serve as a reminder of why we can't help falling in love with these lesser known landscapes.
This place, you've seen the movie with me. That is the যোগেশ্বরের গুপ্ত ধর্মের সন্ধানে। লাস্টে ওরা ট্রেজার যখন পায় তখন দেখেছিস এরকম ছোট্ট একটা ডোর ছিল, ওটার ভিতরে ঢুকে ওরা ভিতরে ওই জিনিসটা খুঁজে পেল।
এটা হেড ব্যাঙ্গিং করছে, এটা বাম্পিং হেড ব্যাঙ্গিং।
ওরা ম্যাক করে।
It has like this, like a snake tongue.
snake tongue, it looks like a double leaf, right? Two leaves joined together.
Yeah.